Hello and be welcome to this panel on Be Future Festival. I'm very happy to see you here and that we are all here today to discuss a very important issue. Maybe some people are still on the road. It's not so easy actually to get here from our Landesmuseum, where the big opening has taken part just some minutes ago. But we just discussed that we're going to start right now, and as the discussion is going to be recorded and published on YouTube afterwards, so many other people will have the possibility to see it and watch your discussion in the aftermath to this moment. Yes, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Claudia Rittel. I'm a new staff member of Bonn Institute. I just started on the 1st of September. And I'm very happy we are here in these nice rooms of design offices today, that they made it possible to discuss here and to get together here. And the next 45 minutes we're going to talk about a very important issue, which is still a kind of taboo, I would say, that's one sign that it's even more important we start talking about it. Mental health and how to stay sane in the news business. It's a question people haven't asked for a long time, so now we are asking it and you're going to discuss about it. It's very important in times of media budgets being cut as well, and hate and physical attacks getting more common in the daily business. On the panel, I would like to say hello to Thies from the regional daily Augsburger Allgemeine, Chiponda and Chimbelu from Zambia. He's a Zambian-American journalist, mainly working for Deutsche Welle and based in Berlin, if I'm right. And Hannah Storm, a media consultant, who are going to talk about this issue today. They will be moderated by Irene Caselli, who is from the Dart Center of Journalism and Trauma, a project of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Thank you all for being here, and I will just hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for having us. And maybe it's telling that there's only a few of us here in this room today, but hopefully more people will be able to tune in. And I actually wanted to start this conversation with a confession, which is that not so long ago, I've been having a lot on my mind over these past few years. I've become a mother. I was a mother first 4 years ago. Then again, I have a 10-month-old that you may have seen around. And there's been a lot. I lost my job during the pandemic. I had a few miscarriages. It's been a few, hard months. And recently, I've been trying to slow down with work. I'm a journalist. I'm a consultant for the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, but I'm also a freelance journalist. And recently, I couldn't get an editor off my back. And the only thing I could think of was lying to this editor, saying that I had a bad health condition, which was not really the truth, and I've never lied before. And I felt really bad. It was the only way that I could get out of a story, and that I could find a little bit of respite. And why am I sharing this confession? It's because I felt so bad, and I didn't realize what was behind this until a friend and journalist told me, why are you feeling bad? You know that if you were, for example, in the Netherlands where they have burnout leave, you could have just said, hey, I think I'm struggling, and they would have, given you some leave without having to go into any details of what was happening to you. And that's when I realized, maybe I'm burnt out. Maybe something is happening. I've been thinking about mental health for a very long time, but yet when it comes to applying it to me, I was really struggling to see it. So this is a confession, not because I want to turn this into, a therapy session. I'm not a psychologist. None of us here on this panel is a psychologist, but we do believe that it's very important to talk openly about mental health, because it's very important for ourselves to be well and for the work that we do to be well. We'll have time for questions at the end, but let me start by introducing this amazing panel. of speakers that we have. So we'll start from Lea. Lea Thies heads the Günther Holland School of Journalism at the German newspaper Augsburger Allgemeine, and is responsible for training young journalists, and she's currently focusing on the topics of digital transformation, new work, and resilience. She has also included the latter in her journalism training, and to ensure that the trainees at the Mediengruppe Pressedruck are even better equipped to meet today's challenges in the profession, they learn how to specifically reduce stress, bounce back from hate speech, and take care of their mental health. So we'll talk to Lea in a second about that program. Then Hannah Storm, she's a media consultant who specializes in journalism safety, mental health, and empathetic leadership. She works with newsrooms around the world to create spaces where everyone feels safe to share their experiences of mental health, and where leaders recognize the value of normalizing conversations around well-being for their people. She's the founder and co-director of Headlines Network, which promotes more open conversations about mental health in journalism. And she's also authored a book for Routledge, a practical guide for journalists on mental health, to be published early next year. And here next to me is Chiponda. Chimbelu is a Zambian-American journalist based in Berlin. He mainly works for Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster, where he's a member of the editorial board. His work focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in editorial content. Chiponda also works in the business department as a presenter, producer, and reporter. So, Hannah, I would love to start with you because, you know, many people have been talking about the effects of trauma for a bunch of time. The Dart Center, Colombia, has been doing it also for a long time. But it's actually, as I was just saying, it's actually hard for us journalists to realize what trauma may mean, but also what the effects of other things on our mental health are. So when do you think that the world of journalism has become a little bit more tuned in to the ideas around mental health, and what happened?
Thank you, Irene. I'm really grateful to be here. I have very sweaty hands, so that's my confession. It doesn't matter how many times I speak about my mental health or the work I do, I always get sweaty hands. So that's okay, because I also know now that I respond and recognize that as well. And I just want to mention, kind of repeat back what I heard from Irene there. I'm really saddened that in 2023, I hear stories that we aren't in a space where we can openly share our experiences of mental health, where we feel that we are fighting against repercussions in the newsroom. In this book I've just written, I interviewed 45 people from around the world, from more than a dozen countries. They all spoke to me on the record, and in all the work I've done, one of the things that comes up time and time again is I can't speak about my experience of my mental health because I am scared that it is going to impact my career. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I wish my managers would treat me like a human being, not a resource or part of a machine. We've been speaking about mental health, so one of the chapters in this book is about the history of these conversations, and you say about 20 years, so about the turn of the millennium. There's a lot of work done around physical safety. It kind of morphed into conversations around psychological safety, although I would argue that everything intersects. But over time, it's moved from the really traditional kind of sense of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that is in conflict veterans, so generally white guys who are middle-aged who go to war, who experience PTSD, through to, nowadays, much a broader spectrum. And it's really encouraging to see that the kind of conversation reflects the fact that, or starting to reflect the fact that everybody has mental health. But like you said, you were kind of almost coming up with an excuse around physical health. Everybody has mental health, just like everybody has physical health, and that all exists across the spectrum. I will be quiet in 1 second, but I would just say that I think the most important watershed moment in recent years, and it probably won't surprise you to hear this, was COVID. We were all in a situation where our lives were turned upside down very quickly, our industry was reinvented very quickly, and we all had to deal in different ways. It was the same storm. We were all in different boats and vessels, but it meant that we were able some way to normalize the conversation around mental health. there's a heck of a long way to go still to normalize it.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And I think, we may come back to COVID a few times, just because there was maybe something about all of us being stuck in our homes that made us feel like that kind of leveled some of the differences, although it didn't also at the same time. But at least we were able to share a little bit more openly about what we knew was also the reality for someone else, like getting stuck, like we're like, oh, you're also experiencing this. But then it's interesting how, again, it's normalizing that the physical sort of nature of being stuck in a place allowed us to kind of talk about the mental health aspect of things as well. Leah, in your work, you had your own journey to understand why mental health should be part of your work, sort of the priorities of your workplace. Can you tell us a bit about how you got to developing this this program around mental health and why it focuses especially on the youngest?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity of being here and talking about this journey we're still experiencing in Augsburg. Our job was always tough. We see things normal people who work in offices don't see. We see, in worst cases, accidents where people die. We sit in court cases and hear things nobody want to hear, and you don't get it out of your brain again for 2 weeks or something like that. But since the invention of social media and the internet, there's a new dimension in all of this. You get more feedback, and the quality of the feedback is, not like 20 years ago. So I experienced, since the pandemic crisis, the quality and the sound of the feedback was getting harder, much harder. It started a little bit since, in my opinion, since Trump was elected, so it was more aggressive. And through the pandemic crisis, I think more people talked about mental health or realized, okay, it's hard, it's tough for me. And for me, it was like a trigger when I read that the Bavarian government is installing mental health coaches at schools after the pandemic crisis, and now try to help the people grasp with all the problems during the crisis. And then I thought, okay, in a few years, these pupils will become trainees, and who's caring about them? And that's why I decided, okay, we have to have a plan for them. We have to help them to get a nano skin or a nano layer that the hate speech cannot get into or doesn't hurt so much, and also that they're self-sufficient to empower themselves more, to be more resilient in their work. And that's why we organized a plan to help them getting strong journalists.
Okay, we'll come back a little bit to talk about the plan, but thank you for sharing that. It's like very important to get this sort of the journeys of everybody's like realization of why it's important to put mental health like as one of the priorities in newsrooms. And Chiponda, I'd love to hear from you. Of course, you know, a lot of the issues we talk about are not just things that may be personal, but there are loads of structural issues that, of course, affect people's mental health. Where we were just talking about, you know, the problems with hate speech or, you know, the way that our jobs have changed because of the feedback that can become more direct. But of course, there's like structural racism, there's sexism, there's loads of other issues that affect people and that are also not being questioned. So what have you noticed in your workplaces, and what have you seen that is being done to also counter these other more structural issues?
Well, I mean, I think I need to touch on what was already mentioned by Leah and Hannah in terms of the change we've seen since the pandemic. And I think where I work at Deutsche Welle, the change we saw is at least we had a hotline established where people could call in anonymously, and people who work at Deutsche Welle, and they could talk about any mental health issues they were facing. That was done, I think, during the pandemic 2020. That's when that was established. So there's definitely there's been moves towards improving mental health support. However, in terms of structural issues, there's conflict management, which could be a structural attempt to solve that, but it doesn't really, it's not sort of dealing with specific problems, whether it's racism, sexism, or queerphobia, transphobia, or specific elements. And that is something that is, of course, not just within where I work. I think this is a structural issue we have across the board, across other media companies as well, sort of recognizing the fact that certain marginalized groups or underrepresented groups within newsrooms may need extra support or different types of support, let's put it that way. That is not something that is acknowledged, and that leaders try to address with support systems that specifically target those issues. So we don't have that, and of course the conversation around all those issues in Germany is not where it needs to be. So that's also another on a societal level, but of course it's people here are not just from Germany. I think we need to always recognize the structural issues we see within media companies responding to mental health issues and supporting them within their own companies. It also has to do with what's happening within society. But there's been at least a move to, have some sort of support system, but that support system is very general and not bearing in mind certain other structural issues that are within the organization.
Right, so following up on what you're saying, so for example, one of the things that we were talking about is, okay, you're offering a hotline, but who's on the other side of that hotline? Who's the psychologist that may be attending, right? Tell me more about that, is it, if we're not recognizing that there is a diversity problem, there is a racism problem, do we have diversity in psychologists, for example, that may be able to understand other types of problems affecting people? Have you seen that, or have you seen a diversity of psychology? Is that something that comes up?
I mean, this is something I spoke about while trying to prepare for this panel discussion, I must confess. I actually became more aware of even the offerings we had within my own organization, because of course it's not something that's mentioned every week within, editorial meetings. So we don't say at the end of the editorial meeting, there's been these protests in Iran, or there's been, the floods in Libya, or the earthquake in Morocco. If anyone is troubled by what they saw, reach out to this number. We don't do that every week, and it's something that we need to be repeatedly reminded of, because of course, even if we've heard it once, twice in a quarter, we need the reminders just in case that's the moment at which we're experiencing some sort of, traumatic experience as a result of those images or whatever news that we're dealing with. In terms of the diversity of the people who offer these services of support, I spoke with one of my colleagues who's trying to help organize that, and there is support in English and German, but of course we have 32 languages at Deutsche Welle. So if someone's working in the Bangla department, where it's Bengali or Hindi department, and they would prefer to get the help in Hindi, they could try to organize something, but I think it becomes a bit more complex, because of course it has to be a service provider. We're a tax-funded organization, a German tax-funded organization, so that means it has to be a provider who is also certified by the German state, and all these things then become more complex. So those are structural issues that we can also think about beyond the structural sexism, racism, or whatever. There's also the structural issues of the bureaucracy and what it means to be embedded within German society, and what that means for people who are coming from other cultures who might need that kind of support within our own newsrooms. So that's also another level, which is something that we don't actually speak about openly with colleagues, that actually these colleagues, maybe they'll be left down, what do we do? And so that maybe there's also a discussion that we need to be having in terms of trying to address that. There's of course peer support groups, but of course that's always limited as well. So there's a lot happening there. Sorry, I threw out a lot of things, but we can get more into it if there's any further questions.
Yeah, we can get more into them, and I think there's a lot to be said also about, what how much can we openly talk about this thing? You know, how much are peer support groups going to be created within the workspace, considering that we're all still scared of the repercussions that we may have, you know, in the workplace, and what it means to speak up about feeling affected by a story, or you know, how much are we gonna be open about these issues? So yes, so there's a lot that we put on the table. I'd love to talk about solutions, although, you know, of course, we will come back to the issues themselves. But Lea, tell us about your solution in your newsroom, and then we'll come around to other things that we've seen around.
Yeah, we established a 5-pillar plan for our company. So a big focus is on self-empowerment. So we teach our colleagues, especially our trainees, how to take care of themselves in a better way. What are the symptoms for stress? What is, how do they stay in balance when they have stressy times? Also, how they can switch bad minds into good minds in the brain. How they can learn tricks that hate speech is getting through their skin. That's one important part. The second pillar is we educate people in mental health first aid. In every office there will be one person who had this education. And these people, in my idea, they should be like a seismograph for a crisis. They know what are the symptoms when people in my office have a crisis, and how can I talk with them about it, and how can I empower these people to help to search for professional care. It's not kind of, oh, they're all like psychologists. No, it's more, okay, there's something strange. Okay, let's talk about it. And the important thing is how you talk about it, because it's like with physical first aid. When an accident occurs, some people are afraid of helping and pumping, and they don't know what to do. And with psychological problems, there's a big fear about, how do I talk about this? Can I do it worse? And we teach people how they act when they see somebody in my team or even another colleague has a crisis. The third pillar is we educate the leading staff, that they listen to the seismographs and they don't think, oh yeah, Gen Z doesn't work, they are lazy, or they are not hard enough. No, we teach the leading staff that they help to find infrastructural solutions for the person in a crisis. The fourth pillar is, we have it already since several years, but nobody talks about it in a certain way. We have a company doctor and a company psychologist, and these people open the door to professional help. Especially after the pandemic crisis, it's very hard in Germany to get a therapy. Even when your crisis is not that big, yeah, but sometimes when the crisis is small and you get very fast aid, then perhaps it doesn't become big. So that's important to get fast professional help. And this network of these professional doctors it's a fast track for help. That's important. And then we also thought about what is with people that doesn't want to talk with a colleague about mental health because it's still a taboo. We offer them, that's a plan in the intranet, a plan that are the symptoms for crisis. These are the numbers there you can talk to, because a lot of people who have a crisis, they are lost in opportunities, finding the right number, the right person, the right first level support in any in the German infrastructure. So we show them that are the solutions. And by the way, then there's also a reminder, we have these mental health first aid specialists here in the company. These are the names. Go to the person you trust on. Yeah, that's a plan.
Yeah. So there's, you're handling the very different levels, trying to educate also the top and giving options beyond sort of a company doctor that may be seen as someone representing the company, or maybe something that people may shut down to also, which is very interesting. Hannah, you also work as a consultant among many other things, but what have you seen working from your experience? What have you seen as successful initiatives that really help journalists feel safer and better?
I'm really encouraged to hear what you're doing. I think that what the I'm really encouraged to hear what you're doing. I think the example of the Augsburger Allgemeine is a really excellent one. So I think that, in terms of good practice, that's a really great one for people to follow. There are 2 or 3 things I would suggest is, one is, and I'm speaking a little bit later on at length, so I can, unpack some of this even further, but and I'll be talking about my own experience of PTSD and mental health journey as well, but I think one of the key things is, let's not underestimate the power of stories. We're conditioned as journalists to be told never become the story, right? And yet, when we're able to share something of our story, when we create those spaces where people feel comfortable to do so, generally you will feel you'll hear that resonates with somebody. I remember kind of feeling incredibly isolated and ashamed when I had PTSD and all of the other kind of things I've had around my mental health, impacts of vicarious trauma and moral injury and burnout. You feel ashamed. Sometimes you don't want to talk with people. Sometimes you feel like you're the only person in the world going through this. And so to hear other people's stories is really important. We don't all have the privilege of being able to share our story all the time, so we should never feel forced to do so. I would never underestimate the weirdness of the kind of whole macho power play that's taken place in the past, ever since journalism became journalism, right? Journalism is run by a certain type of person traditionally, and therefore that certain type of person owns the power dynamic. And so I think that person therefore also needs to lead, lead from the front and lead from the top. They need to be decent role models. But I think one of the things that prevents people from speaking is that we've been conditioned to certain types of behaviours, to accept certain types of behaviours as normal, which they're not. So stories, leadership and role modelling, really kind of making things transparent, as you said, and transparent and visible, making sure people know where there is, we were talking about this on the way here, making sure people know where the resources are and what's on hand, and making sure those resources really are as kind of flexible and different and diverse as possible to the audiences of people who you're serving. And then I would say, just 2 more points quickly, combine the conversations around safety together. So the online safety, the harassment, we've seen this massive rise in online harassment and vitriol in the last probably last 10 years, but peaking with Trump and then peaking again with COVID. Combine that with conversations about physical safety and combine that with conversations about psychological safety as well. So it's all holistic. And then plan from the beginning, the middle and end. You don't send people into war zones without a plan, without a risk assessment, without the right kit. We're talking about the same from a psychological safety perspective. What do you do before? What do you do during? And what is the contingency plan you have in place afterwards as well?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. We'll open to questions. Are there questions? If not, you can think about it for a second and we'll keep having a chat. Any questions now? Okay. Chiponda, I'd love to come back to you because, we were just saying, you were saying one thing that really resonated with me. It's not that at the end of every editorial meeting, and, you're talking about your workplace, but really, I've never experienced that in any other newsroom. It's not that at the end of these meetings, we're like, hey, we've just talked about a bunch of really tough stories, which may affect some of us personally or not also. Remember that we have these resources available. So there's still newsrooms are still, as Hannah was saying, structurally thought out by this sort of white male kind of leadership, or in a very macho kind of tough way. You need to be tough to be able to be reporting on news that is tough, right? What do you think can be done around this? Can single actions work? Can you speak up and be like, hey, maybe we should remind people that we have some resources? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Single actions, that's always hard because, of course, it's the system that's at fault. It's the leaders who have established these types of routines, and they're the ones who are, at the end of the day, going to be the solutions. Of course, maybe someone like me can go and say something to a leader who's in a position to change something, and hopefully they take that on hand and do something about it. I think what Leah mentioned is quite interesting because, of course, we have been educating, Deutsche Welle has been educating leaders. There's a company, a psychologist on both sides for a couple of hours a week, and someone who, what I found interesting in the conversation I had with a colleague who's also been responsible for trying to organize the support is that she told me that they try to prioritize incidents as well where that trauma was experienced at work. But I was wondering, like, okay, how do you kind of figure that out? Because I was like, okay, sometimes it's like, if someone is going home drinking every day because they are totally exhausted from all the news and whatever, is that sort of, trauma experience at work or not? It becomes very complicated. Where do you draw the line? But of course, she was probably referring to like actual incidents, like seeing an accident. But of course, it's not just about that. Maybe, if you looked at something traumatic and then you went home and you develop alcoholism as a result of that, what happens, or a drug habit, which some people do as well, just things that people never talk about probably openly in a newsroom. So there's all these issues between the structures, which are great, we need them, and I think that organizations like Augsburger Allgemeine, even Deutsche Welle are trying to do some work, but I think the problem is really every day talking about it, mentioning, we have these traumatizing images, whether it's during the COVID pandemic, how do we deal with that? And reminders, constant reminders, the stories, yes, but reminders that there is help. And then, of course, checking how much the help is being used. Is it stagnating? Is it rising? Is it going down? I think all of these are, signals. And who is it potentially being used by? Like, are there different types of usage depending on which departments people are in? Meaning that maybe some people are in departments where that is not being taken into account, because of course the education of the leaders and maybe even the peer support colleagues, we have the education of the leaders but not the peer support colleagues as much. Like, we don't have like one colleague who's assigned with that specific task. But I think even those things, whereas I think they're checks, I don't think they're good enough checks if you don't have the data to support how much is being used by everyone. So I think there needs to be more to be done, and I know this is an expensive issue for some organizations because they think it's not something they need to be working on, but it's about people not being burnt out and taking time off work for 6 months or whatever. So it does cost the organization in the end anyway. Healthy colleagues have much better journalism. They ask the right questions. They're much better able to cover stories or step back if they need to step back, because they can say, I need to step back now. And there's all various issues connected to this. So it's very much about the type of journalism, type of world we show our audiences, because of course our health is very much about the products that we produce as well.
Yeah, and I mean what you're saying is also, it's very difficult to step up and to become like the person that will just be the person in the meeting saying, hey, by the way, we should be talking about mental health. And oftentimes it's like people that have lived experience that really carry this extra burden, which is to then become advocates for this kind of work. And Hannah, I know this is something that you're carrying also as a burden. And I would love to talk about this because, I've become more open about speaking about the struggles I'm having with colleagues and trying to normalize it. But I find it very hard because I still think like, oh, are people going to think that I'm not capable of working and you go in the same loop all the time? What does it mean to have the lived experience and then to have to be carrying the burden of like advocating for change?
Just come back to your point. Deloitte, which is a company, it's an international company, did some research recently, and this was not media specific, but it was UK industry specific, and they showed that for every investment of £1, more or less €1, for every proactive investment in well-being for employees, you'd have a return on investment of £5.30. So for me, it's a complete and utter no-brainer. And yet I feel like it's this strange Sisyphean task that I'm taking on board every single day of my working career, saying to people, come on, come and invest in mental health conversations, because I know that it will help with absenteeism, presenteeism, retention, diverse people staying in work, trust to our audiences. And so that is really, maybe if you've been there and you've bought the t-shirt, or in my case, you've hit the bottom, maybe you realize that the only way really is up, but you have to have something so profound that makes you kind of realize that there is another way. There's another way that makes journalism more constructive, journalism healthier, and journalists healthier. It is tiring. So my therapist said to me recently, hey, Hannah, do you think you're really doing kind of, good for your mental health working in the line of work that you are doing? And I was like, I don't have any other option. I have to do it. I feel compelled to do it. I know sometimes maybe people look at me and go, oh yeah, she's a bit of a snowflake today because she's talking about her PTSD symptoms. But I think the thing is, we have to normalize it. We have to. And, for me, I'm recovered predominantly from PTSD, but mental health is a journey that we go on throughout our entire life, like physical health. And I think the more we can normalize that, the better. Yeah, it does mean there's certain things, like I was saying to you before, I struggle with taking lifts that close because I have experience of PTSD from being trapped in spaces. So there are certain things I still struggle with. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a hugely empathetic person. I am. And that doesn't mean that I'm not a good manager. I am. It doesn't mean that I'm not a good journalist. I am. Really difficult as a 46-year-old woman to say, I'm good at this, right? Because we're conditioned to not accept that we're good at things. But we have to do that. But then I think I'll finally stop with the fact that we also need to recognize for any of these advocates, how we can be good allies, because it is tiring. It is tiring being the different person talking about things.
Thank you, Hannah. And Leah, I'd love to come to you, just checking if there are questions. Feel free to raise your hand if you do have a question. But Leah, I'd love to come back to you because the scheme that you've set up, you had to actually go and find funding for it. So tell me about this, because even, what we just heard from Hannah is incredibly compelling. Like investing in mental health, like proactively, actually has good returns for companies. We even have a financial argument for it, but you had to go and find funding elsewhere to make this happen.
I had the big luck to get a funding from Start Into Media for the Future Skills funding. And I applied for the funding because I said resilience is one of the major future skills for journalists, I guess, in the future. And it's important that we, for our democracy, it's important to have strong journalists. And when people are afraid of this job and they don't work as a journalist, then who's reporting? That's why I said, okay, let's find a way of making our job even better. And that's why I got 15,000 euros for building up this strategy. In my opinion, for the companies, there's also another reason why it's very good to talk about mental health, because we have, as everybody knows, we have a lack of experts. We are looking all for trainees. It's a big competition for being the best company, and it's not so important anymore for the younger generation to get the big paycheck. It's very important to have a nice climate among colleagues in the company. And when a company is caring about mental health and they are caring of each other, so the swarm is in a better mood, then it's an asset, in my opinion, because people decide, okay, it's a company with a nice culture, so I want to be there, and even perhaps if another company is offering more money, they say, okay, but it's important for me to have nice colleagues and to have a company who's taking care about my mental health. And at the end, that's my plan, when we talk more and more and more and every day about mental health, and even from the top level, then the fear is getting smaller. And I have good news according to this topic. 3 months ago, we were at the police, so it's part of our training. And I talked to a police officer and asked them, yeah, what is going on with you? I mean, your job is tough. I mean, you are the first person on the accident. We are mostly the second. And you see shootings and so on. I mean, in Germany, not so heavily like in the US. But in the US, the suicide rate among police officers was going up. And then they realized, okay, we have to talk about it. We need kind of psychologist help for the officers. And he told me, in former times it was like in the newsrooms in newspapers, you didn't talk about it. You deal it with yourself, and it had the label you are weak when you say, okay, it was hard for me. Even when you're not mental health, but whoa, that was really a hard topic, and it was hard for me to screen all the videos from mass murder or something like that. And he said, because of this change in the infrastructure, more people were brave enough to go to this psychological experts, and now it's brave to talk about it. It's not so. It's not. You're not the hard guy when you don't talk about it. You're the hard guy when you talk about it, and I think that should change also in our newsrooms. It's the label of weak should be changed in the label of strong. And perhaps, yeah, I hope that my solution, it's not the solution, but it's one solution. I hope that the sustainable part of it will be that perhaps one day when a colleague said, I have soul, it's the same status like I have back. And I have back problems or I have soul problems, it's no difference.
Thank you for that. We have literally, I think, 2 minutes, and I would love to, I mean, we've been talking about structural issues and, you know, and a lot of things that we cannot do by ourselves, basically. But the panel is titled How to Stay Sane in the News Business, and I would love to come to something that, you know, I don't want to be misunderstood. You know, I don't think that, you know, if you do yoga every morning, we're going to fix the news business, but I would love to come to a few sentences by all of you about what you've done personally to stay sane in the news business, if you feel like sharing. Just a couple of things. Chiponda.
I can go first. I mean, I don't compromise on my exercise. I always exercise, and it doesn't matter what deadline I'm on. It doesn't matter. Work is never an excuse for me not to exercise, because that's time for myself. So that's something that I always do. I think everyone needs to cultivate something that they do for themselves, whether it's a hobby or something. You need to find, it doesn't matter what the deadline is. You need to carve the time out for yourself. Work should never be an excuse for you to not do something for yourself or your health, because it's like the worst excuse ever. And at the end of the day, you're the one who pays for it, because you're not prioritizing yourself. So that's something I just don't compromise on, and that's super important for me. Yeah, that's one thing at least. Much easier to take with you, perhaps.
Yeah, so in English, mental health begins with 2 letters, M-E, and M-E is me. And therefore, to this point, you have to prioritize yourself. The oxygen mask on the aeroplane, you have to put that on first, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And so I run most days. That's my thing. And then one other thing I do, and I heard this from Ana Zellhuber, is an amazing Mexican psychiatrist working with journalists and frontline responders. She says, find time for joy. So do something every day which is silly or joyful. So sometimes we have a kitchen disco at home. I have 2 children, and we put the music on a Friday, and we dance in the kitchen to some fantastically funny, silly song, and it really makes us all laugh. So time for joy is super important. Don't compromise on that, because journalism is always going to be there. There's always going to be a breaking news story. So just make sure that you don't break.
my trick is very simple. I do it every night with my son, and before he's falling asleep, we think about 3 things we are thankful for, and that can be a warm fresh bread with butter and self-made marmalade, or it can be a nice contact to any person, and also the little things. And then, it's surprisingly, it gives me a big strength. And even when it was a hard day, it's nice to see, okay, good things happened, and also it's amazing to see when you have a big joy in small things, and you are aware, your awareness is getting bigger. Small things you see and think, okay, that was really cool, and hopefully my son will copy that. And
What's yours, Irene?
I mean, kids are very helpful. They're tiring, but they're very helpful. I have a 10-month-old, so a lot of silliness and a lot of like being in the present. And I'm finding a hard time finding me time, which is what I'm struggling with. Therapy, I never find, always get the right slot in. So external help, very helpful. Thank you for asking. I love to close the panel and thank you all, and I'd love to hear what your coping mechanisms are. But thank you for all your input, and don't forget to, Hannah has a later panel at 3 p.m. it is?
I think it's at 5. It might be at 6, but it's a 5.
Keynote. Okay.
It's in the other big building, so clearly I will know what time I'm speaking.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you very much for being here and for these interesting and very personal insights and all the inspiring ideas. And have a nice day. And I hope even you can get inspired during this day on all the interesting lectures and keynotes we still have today. And as well to you, thank you for being here, and spread the word. It's going to be on YouTube in some weeks, so a lot more people can watch and listen to what you have been said today. Thank you very much.